Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. In this video, we're going to talk about the magical electional opportunities that are available to us between the Pisces New Moon on February 23rd and the Virgo Full Moon on March 3rd, 9th. So thankfully, we do have some electional opportunities available to us this 2-week period. Last time we didn't have any, and then the time before that we had like 5. So, it's a real roller coaster around here these days. So it's good to be able to have some electional charts to share with everybody. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Our first electional opportunity is going to be on February 25th at around 5 a.m. my time. And it's going to be an opportunity for a Saturn talisman. Now, all of the elections in this video are actually going to be pretty close together. They're going to hit us kind of one after another in those last few days of February. So get prepared now while you can. So we're always looking for those 4 kind of basic placements that make the criteria for a planetary talisman possible or worth utilizing. And our first one, of course, is that target planet, in this case Saturn, needs to be in a major form of dignity, preferably domicile or exaltation. And here we have Saturn in domicile in Capricorn, which is really good. We want to make sure that it's either the planet's day or hour, and in this instance, it is Saturn's hour. The third thing we want is the planet to be in an angle, whether preferably the ascendant or midheaven, and here we have Saturn close to the ascendant. And then finally, we want the moon to be able to immediately apply an aspect to that planet, and here we have the moon applying to the sextile of Saturn. So everything here checks out insofar as a Saturnine talisman. Usually Saturn in the first house would be non-ideal, but because this is a Saturn talisman, we do want that. And then, of course, we want to make sure that Saturn and the moon and the ascendant are unafflicted by Mars, who's chilling here in the 12th house, not really doing anything. So Saturn talismans are a little bit more difficult to utilize in that, of course, Saturn is a malefic type planet, so we can only really do its malefic type things, right? But there are some things that are kind of generally conducive or generally positive, or conventionally positive, I guess we could say, that Saturn can help in. So Saturn can help, of course, in any kind of agricultural concerns or plant growing, because Saturn has connections back to ancient agricultural gods that we can tap into. Saturn is really good for learning, especially things that we would consider like deep wisdom or like kind of higher education, more complicated topics. Physics, astronomy would be a good one. Astrophysics, of course, would be really good. History, because of Saturn's connection with the ancient past. And then, of course, a slew of like occult or magical type topics are things that Saturn can also be good for. So those are some ideas as well. Of course, there's always the malefic type aspects of Saturn to talk about that, you can make Saturn type talismans to, scare people if that's what you needed. So in that instance, Saturn talismans can actually be used for more protection-based things, but it's like a protection based on fear, which might not be something that a lot of people really want, or a type of energy that people would like to tap into. Like not a lot of people want to be like intimidating or feared by others, but some people do. And some people might be in situations where they require that. So just something to keep in mind there. And then, of course, one thing to always take into consideration whenever we're working with planetary talismans is that the planets will have kind of general powers that they can do, like those things that I just talked about with Saturn, agricultural, deep wisdom, longevity even. Those are kind of like general Saturnine topics. Oh, another thing Saturn can be good for is working with the spirits of the deceased, because Saturn kind of hangs out towards the end of the celestial spheres there. So that's just another kind of general utilization to throw out there before I forget. But so the planets kind of have their general powers, but then they also have their more specific powers. And their specific powers are going to depend on what they're doing in your natal chart. So like, for instance, if you have, Saturn ruling the first house, well, Saturn isn't generally considered a planet capable of bestowing health. He's usually pretty counter indicative of health. But because Saturn rules that individual's first house, then he becomes responsible for that person's health. So that person, specifically, anybody with a Saturn-ruled ascendant, can use a Saturn talisman for health. And then, the same thing can be said of an individual with, Capricorn or Aquarius in the 10th house. Saturn doesn't typically have to do with honors or being, recognized or anything like that. That's really not what Saturn wants. But because Saturn rules the 10th house and is responsible for recognition and honors and career goals and things like that for that specific individual, then a Saturnine talisman for those things, for career goals or for promotion or for anything like that, can be used for that specific person. So just another thing to keep in mind. One final thing to talk about in terms of planetary talismans is that not everybody can work with a planetary talisman the same way, or of a talisman of a specific planet. the same way, because we are born with the planets in a certain disposition towards us as individuals. So if individuals are born with a Saturn that, rules bad houses or is really debilitated, and kind of generally causing problems in one's life through the manifestation of non-ideal life circumstances, things like that, then it's going to be really important to not jump into, a Saturn talisman and just have it and think that things will be fine. You're probably going to notice that those more negative manifestations of that planet and the topics that it signifies in a natal chart are going to become amplified, because that's all that planet has to feed on with you. Like, that's its relationship with you, kind of more antagonistic. So in those instances, I recommend people, go ahead. Like, I believe that anybody can work with any planetary talisman. It's just you have to approach it differently. So for instance, if you are in that situation where you have, a retrograde Saturn that's combust, or, square Mars, or in the 8th house, or, any combination of those things, then you'll want to take more of a remedial practice. So you can have a talisman, but couple that with a remedial practice, and that can be either through like planetary charities or through like meditations or offerings in general. Things like that can be utilized, but you just have to make sure that you're not just running out and grabbing the first Saturn talisman that you can find because you think that it will solve a lot of these Saturnine problems, or you mitigate them in some way, because you might find that they make them worse. So just be careful and that's not just a Saturn type thing. It's not just something that's unique to Saturn, but that's also for any planet. Having like a debilitated Venus or anything like that is just going to amplify those Venetian problems if you just run and grab the first Venus talisman that you find and just don't do anything, because you're just bringing more and amplifying that Venetian energy in your life, and you already know what that can cause because you've lived that life where Venus debilitated causes specific problems. All right, so our second electional opportunity for this 2-week period is going to be on February 26th, around kind of early afternoon, 2-ish p.m. my time. And this is going to be an example of a first Lunar Mansion talisman. So checking out our election, we see the moon is placed here in the first Lunar Mansion and is applying a square to Jupiter in Capricorn. Now, the first Lunar Mansion is a mansion that's used for like initiating projects, or, kind of focusing intent or energy into the completion of a thing. So the first Lunar Mansion is really like a great motivational talisman for anybody who has maybe been sitting on a project for a long time, or has a goal that they've been wanting to accomplish, or a habit they're trying to make, like a more healthy kind of habit. Just anything that you've been kind of trying to talk yourself into doing but haven't been able to do for some reason is a great is a great reason to make a first Lunar Mansion talisman to help with. It really has this kind of get up and go, kind of lighting a fire underneath you energy, and then applying this square with Jupiter and Capricorn. Generally, planets in fall are not super ideal for talismans to be created with. But, we do what we have to work with here, and our main focus is really just the planet itself and making sure it's not accidentally debilitated in some way. So with Jupiter and Capricorn, the energy here is a bit more sleepy and methodical, which can be really great. It can be exactly what people need. So just make sure that, your needs, kind of what you're wanting to accomplish and how you're wanting to accomplish that, are met by what the election is showing or doing. So if it's something that you really want to be more like gunshot, let's get this done with, then this talisman might not be all that helpful. For that, you might want something more like a Mars or Mercury or Sun contact. But with Jupiter and Capricorn, it's going to be much more that like kind of slow and steady wins the race kind of situation. So something to keep in mind with that, just to determine whether or not you want to move forward with this first Lunar Mansion talisman, or just wait until we have one later. But this is kind of the warning, because the sun here is getting very close into that mansion. It's at 7 degrees Pisces now. So it won't be too long before it's moved into the first part of Aries, and then this mansion will be in the waning half, and we won't be able to use it for its more motivational type properties. So this is kind of your last call in a way. So just be aware of that too. All right, our third electional opportunity is one that I'm actually very excited about, especially after I made a big deal about it a couple of videos ago about it no longer being available due to the Saturn square. But I was able to find a third Lunar Mansion talisman, one of my favorites, where the moon was far enough from Saturn to not have to worry about the square. So in this case, we have the moon here in the third lunar mansion on the midheaven, and applying a trine to Mars in Capricorn, which is really great. Mars in Capricorn, that exalted Mars energy baked into this is going to be super fun to work with. Meanwhile, the Lord of the first house is the Sun here in Pisces, in the 8th house, but unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and not combust, obviously. So doing pretty well, something we can definitely work with. Now, the third lunar mansion is, like I said, one of my favorites. It was the first lunar mansion talisman. The first astrological magical talisman I ever made, and my success with that in a couple of different areas really kind of convinced me that, hey, there's something to this, and it's kind of the reason why I'm here doing this today. But the third lunar mansion is used for the acquisition of all good things. So for anybody who has just sort of like some almost amorphous goal that they need to complete, or something that they want to get done that's more about gaining something that you consider to be good, and that there are a couple different ways you can construe that. So it's a pretty open-ended, pretty malleable tool, I guess. In that way, it can be used for a lot of things. It's very versatile, so definitely recommend using it. And when it comes to the third lunar mansion, my experience has been that conciseness is really what's most important. Just make it really concise what you want, and then just kind of let the talisman do its thing. And you might be really surprised at how literally it comes about, or you might be surprised at how kind of indirectly it comes to you. So just be aware of that when working with this talisman. The third lunar mansion is like a super powerful ally. I definitely recommend it, if you have any sort of situation that you want to acquire something. And I think that's really the big focus, that it needs to be something on acquiring. So I'm not sure it can really work on more amorphous goals or things like that. But it's really great on that acquisition of something. But the acquisition, I say that, but the acquisition doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can be a state of mind. It can be a state of health. It can be anything like that. So, but just make sure it's something that you're gaining, either materially or immaterially, something that will be new to your life. And then I don't think the third lunar mansion will have any problems bringing that together. Her powers, like I said, are very, very broad. And there haven't been a lot of things that haven't been able to be brought forth by the third lunar mansion. So even if you're just wanting things like, to be well, to have a new state of health, the third lunar mansion can do, to bring in more revenue streams or, more financial stability, she can do that. A new job or promotion, she can do that. So like I said, her powers are just very broad and very useful. So those were the 3 electional opportunities that we have for this 2-week period: a first lunar mansion for motivation and inspiration, a third lunar mansion talisman for the acquisition of all good things, and then a Saturn talisman for anybody who has been looking for a Saturn electional opportunity to either help to amplify any conventionally positive manifestations of Saturn they might have in their natal chart, or to start that remediation process for anybody who has a difficult Saturn or a more complicated or contentious relationship with that energy and the topics that Saturn signifies in their natal chart. Also, don't forget to check out the links in the description below for kind of an overview or a walkthrough of the talismanic creation process, just to know kind of what you're trying to do or what boxes you're trying to check during that ritual or during that talismanic creation. Also, check out the Saturn Complete Altar set for anybody who is considering a more kind of serious or structured approach to the Saturnine, either remediation or devotional paths. That's always an option as well. So with all that, everybody take care, have a safe new moon, and I'll see everybody on the Virgo Full Moon.